My friends, so much has changed since we last met. We cannot escape the reality of the way we are now living. A quarter of the world, us included, are in lockdown. We are unable to meet and to worship and to grow in our discipleship together as Christians. But as promised, we will continue to grow in our understanding of the Christian faith through these times, albeit you will be watching from your homes and I will be delivering our weekly talk from different surroundings. This week, I was going to look at the cult of the saints, why we have statues in church, and why we ask the saints to intercede for us. But over the week, whilst I've been waiting for all this additional technology to arrive so that I could deliver this talk, I have been noted that we really do not have very much theology coming out to help us through this time. Our bishops, perhaps, have been more focused on who can or who cannot go to church, rather than help us understand our faith in the context of this pandemic that we are living through. So this week, rather than looking at the saints, I want us to explore where God is in all of this. How can God be God of the coronavirus? Why is God allowing so many of us to suffer and so many to die? Is God in our midst during this coronavirus? Or has God himself gone into self-isolation? As with all weeks, let me caveat, I'm not an expert apologist. In fact, it is probably one of the weaker parts of my ministry. Nor am I a scientist or an academic in any way. Like you, I am a disciple of Christ, trying to make my way through this life, hopeful to be an inheritor of God's promise of a place in his heavenly kingdom. We are very much learning together. This coronavirus, like with all other disasters, will result in some of us losing our loved ones. We may also die ourselves. But above all, we risk losing faith, be that for the Christian, religious faith, or perhaps for some of you watching for the first time who have not professed a faith, simply that life has lost a certain consistency and meaning. Whether we are religious or not, we may well be asking where God is in all of this. If God is omnipotent, that is, having unlimited powers, why does he allow the coronavirus? It is a common question that is asked in times of suffering and trauma. Since God is the author of all creation, and we, his creation, are suffering, it is easy to see God as an enemy or a persecuting presence, something from whom we need to get away from. Such hostile response to a deity or fate is a natural response for humans. If God is good, he cannot be omnipotent. And if he is omnipotent, he cannot be entirely good. It is certainly the well-trodden argument that atheists make against the belief in God. If that is what we are then to believe, it must follow that God's unjust treatment of the victims of coronavirus has always been part of his secret plan, his perfect will. We humans are therefore mere pawns in some kind of divine chess game, which he is more assuredly preordained to win. The natural impulse is to try and make sense of this global trauma, because we know that victims of the virus have done nothing to deserve such suffering. How can we relate to God when the world he made does not make sense? For it often appears that the Christian God is not merely one whose thoughts and ways are simply higher than ours, but often quite monstrous and totally alien to them. The coronavirus is what we call a natural evil. Natural evil should not be confused with moral evil. That is the evil wrought by human beings. For example, the use of weapons of mass destruction, genocide, murder, rape, and torture. How could God allow bad people to do such terrible things? That is how moral evil is often considered. This is the classic problem of evil, and the answer has traditionally been to explain the free will of mankind. The problem then of natural evil is that it is quite different, and in some ways a more difficult dilemma. It raises the question of why we succumb to some sort of disease. It's the same question, perhaps, that gnaws our consciences when we read reports about earthquakes or tsunamis that swallow up thousands of innocent people. And it's this question that has gained new urgency in the wake of COVID-19, which knows no borders and does not discriminate who it infects. Unlike the problem of moral evil, there is no moral agent whom we can blame for natural evil. There is no Hitler or other sadistic mass murderer. The coronavirus involves the very impersonal elements of nature. When that happens, we can't help but wonder how a personal God could stand by and let all this happen. Catholic theology does have an answer to this question. The answer begins by taking seriously the reality of the creation events. The created world has real existence. God did not make a dream world full of shadows and appearances. The rocks, the trees, the air, the very garden I am standing in are all very real and exist according to the principles inherent in their nature. So the winds will knock over trees that have grown old and rotted, and rocks will eventually crumble into the sea after centuries of weathering. The best testament to the real existence of creation is humanity itself. The church teaches that we are not wind-up toys. We are not a load of string-controlled puppets. We really have individual existence, self-awareness, and the free will that those realities entail. The same idea applies to the rest of creation. St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that while only we have free will, the rest of creation is certainly not a puppet show put on for God and for our amusement. Each thing operates according to principles that shape its activity. Animals behave according to instinct and natural selection. The weather and the seas ebb and flow in keeping with the laws of thermodynamics, and the suns and stars obey the laws of physics, and viruses act according to their biology. Now, this may all seem obvious to us, but it wasn't always so. The Greeks and Romans did not recognize a clear distinction between the gods and the natural world. For them, the lines between the two were blurred. The gods inhabited nature and even embodied aspects of nature. Aphrodite, for example, personified sexual desire. Likewise, Artemis typified the untamed restlessness of a hunter. Even the elements of nature were viewed as quasi-divine. Of course, this isn't to say that we believe in a clockmaker deity. God certainly does intervene in his creation, the incarnation being the paramount example. But creation and creator are distinct. To deny the existence of creation is to fall into a kind of Hindu-like monoism, the belief that there is only one absolute reality. While denial of the existence of a creator usually ends in some form of atheism. But Genesis tells us that all creation was good. So where does evil come from? In order to find the origins of evil, we must first understand what it is. St. Augustine provides this definition in The City of God. For evil has no positive nature, but the loss of good has received the name evil. This is essentially the same view that St. Thomas Aquinas offers in his Summa Theologica. For evil is the absence of the good, which is natural and due to a thing. I guess another way of putting it would be to say that evil is a deprivation or the lack of good. So given that evil is a kind of not good, what causes it? Aquinas explains that evil cannot be caused by good directly. Instead, it must be accidental. And this can happen in one of two ways. The first is where good is deficient, and the second is where good is accidental. Let's take a look at both in turn. Good is deficient. Aquinas explains that the evil is caused by accident. It has some power, otherwise it would not be able to act in an evil way. But the power is deficient because it was caused by accident from that which is good. Natural evil, as a defect in the power of good, is not at issue here. As we know, the virus is all too effective in its operation. So according to Aquinas, the second way that evil can be caused involves the unintended effects of good actions. For example, a good thing can be so effective in its operation that it causes another good thing to lose its form. Aquinas offers the example of water and fire. The evil is the active power of fire, heat, which destroys the form of water. It creates steam. This isn't a deficiency of power, as heat from fire is the power. Nor is its power a cause of water turning into steam. It's merely the response of water to heat from the fire. But the problem here is we've answered one question only to immediately raise another. Why would God create a world in which it is possible for good things to accidentally cause evil things? The answer is that it is one good thing in particular, us humans, that went astray, throwing the rest of a creation askew. What changed it all, according to Scripture, is the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, an event so catastrophic that it only estranged us from God, that not only estranged us from God, but also wounded the whole of creation in the process. As Genesis says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat its yield all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bear for you, and you shall eat the grass of the field." This idea of the whole of creation as suffering from the sin of man, its steward and vital link to its creator, is echoed in Romans, where St. Paul writes of the universal expectation of redemption. We know that all creation is groaning in labour pains, even until now. Of course, ultimately, we must acknowledge our inability to answer all questions raised by the problem of evil, whether that be natural or moral. In this life, we can attain only a limited understanding of how it is possible for evil to come about from good things. But this shouldn't be construed as some sort of cop-out or a throwing up of our hands and saying it's all God's mysterious way. It is rather an honest and humble admission that we simply do not have all the answers to everything. But the Church has more answers, and better ones, than I believe you will find elsewhere. This is the approach that Pope Emeritus Benedict took when a 7-year-old Japanese girl who had been affected by the 2011 earthquake and tsunami asked why children had to suffer. The Pope responded in part, "I have the same questions, why it is this way. Why do you have to suffer when others live in ease? And we do not have the answers, but we know that Jesus suffered as you do, and innocent, and that the true God who is revealed in Jesus is by your side." This ultimately is the best answer to the problem of evil, both natural and moral. That God cares enough for us that he became one of us, not like us, not disguised like us, but fully human, while retaining full divinity. And that as one of us, God not only shared in the pain and suffering we experience, but took the curse of the fall upon himself in order to redeem the entire created world.